For more, we turn to first France 24's Douglas Herbert.
Good evening.
Doug, this is not the right versus the left. This is the right versus the center, as it's called.
It's the right versus the center.
Or the center-right.
Yeah, center. It's a centrist alliance, is what you're seeing in the headlines. But look, it's centrist in name only, and I say that because if you look at what that actual ticket is, in any other place you would consider this right, even a hard right sort of alliance. You have three military people, generals essentially, a former head of the Israel Defense Forces at the top of the ticket of this new alliance. So it's very much a militaristic in its complexion. But then again, you could argue, you know, when you're up against someone like Benjamin Netanyahu, who has built his political career by governing in, you know, the hardest of the hardest right coalitions in modern Israeli history. You know, this is a prime minister presiding at the top of a right-wing pyramid, if ever there was one. So anything is going to sort of look either more centrist or more left than he is. But I would say that this coalition, like I said, between Benny Gantz, former head of the armed forces for 4 years, 2011 to 15, and a former TV personality turned politician, Lapid, who's maybe going to give the softer, kinder, gentler tone to this new ticket here. It's not what I would call really center, even center left. I do see it as they are right. They are right-wing from an outsider's perspective, at least when it comes to security issues. And I suspect that is what they are sort of banking on, that they will have the credibility on the military security credentials to be able to take on a Benjamin Netanyahu who's really built his career and been able to cling to power by appealing to the sort of ultra-nationalist, nativist, ultra-religious element in Israeli society, and has taken Israeli society, you can argue, to the right with him over his past decade in power, and made everyone hyper-acutely aware of the security considerations and the sense of an Israel under siege, an Israel that must be protected at all costs. All
right. Well, joining us is John Lyndon, European representative for the Alliance for Middle East Peace. Thanks for being with us here on
Good to be with you.
By the way, the tarring, if you will, of this brand new coalition's already begun. A statement put out by Likud says the choice is clear. It's either a left-wing Lapid-Gantz government with the support of Arab parties or a right-wing government led by Netanyahu.
Yes, well, this is a well-tested and tried and successful method within Israeli politics in order to make everything to the left of the incumbent right-wing prime minister seem illegitimate, and very often associating Arab voters with that is a useful tool for delegitimizing and preventing parties from being able to challenge the prime minister. I do think what's happened in the last 24 hours is very significant, though. To see four very senior, credible figures from Israeli politics come together, put egos aside, which is not a very commonplace phenomenon within Israeli politics, and say that they're going to try and challenge Benjamin Netanyahu after 10 consecutive years in power. He has never faced a challenge like this before. It's important to remember that the only time he's lost an election, a national election, was to a former chief of staff in 1999, to Ehud Barak. Now he's facing three of them, including his own former defense minister, Bogi Ya'alon, and a charismatic, telegenic former TV presenter, Yair Lapid. They each complement each other in an interesting way. And I think if there was ever going to be a chance for the prime minister to be unseated as he's approaching a record-breaking tenure in time, now may be it.
Yes. What does, for instance, I see number 4 on the list is another former head of the military, Gabi Ashkenazi. What does he bring to this?
That's what's very interesting. So Gabi Ashkenazi comes from a really tough neighborhood in Jerusalem. He's a former officer of the Golani Brigade. He's Mizrahi, so he comes from North Africa, which is important in Israeli electoral terms because a lot of the Likud's base is made up of Jews of Mizrahi origin. So in that sense, it complements an otherwise sort of white and European list. And there's polling done. Israel's interesting. They poll a lot of hypotheticals in a way that you don't see in other democracies. And it's been demonstrated that Gabi Ashkenazi can move votes from right to left. Up until now, the polling done since Benny Gantz announced his candidacy has shown that essentially he's eating votes from the centre and the left, from Labour, from Yesh Atid. What's happening now with Ashkenazi potentially could allow him to begin to eat into the right-wing bloc. That's critical because around 100 to 150,000 voters can determine whether the left or right-wing blocs, or to your point, I think you're correct, the centre blocs or the right-wing blocs prevail.
Yeah, because the week began with news that Tzipi Livni, the former foreign minister, was quitting politics. The whole political spectrum seems to have shifted, right? Is it a game of two halves and at the end Netanyahu wins?
Potentially. I mean, look, we'll see. There'll be a lot of polling done over the weekend. My sense is that he's probably still narrowly a favourite simply because precedent shows he's the most effective campaigner maybe in Israeli history. There's another problem structurally that we need to address, and that's that straight away the centre and centre-left are starting with around a 13-seat handicap, in that Arab parties, making up 21% of the population of Israel, are seen as illegitimate coalition partners. Now, if you think about this in terms that we would understand, in the United States, around 12.5% of American citizens are African American. But could you imagine the Democratic Party building a coalition electorally without those votes? If we want to see long-term transformational change in Israel that can support a really serious peace process, making significant concessions, as Rabin managed to do in the 1990s, I believe that it's fundamental that Arab parties and leaders and voters are brought in some way to the governing coalition mechanism.
And I was just going to say, Netanyahu's basic response to all of this has been to go in just the opposite direction by courting, which is not just sort of an ultra-right party. He has the Jewish Home Party in his coalition, but really trying to encourage them into a merger, into Jewish Home, into a merger with with an even hardcore party, the Jewish Power Party, which is based on the late Rabbi Kahane, you might remember, what were his major precepts? It was basically building a Jewish theocracy and expelling Palestinian Arabs from Israel, basically get the Arabs out. So what Netanyahu has basically been doing in the name of trying to cling to power, and I would say it is clinging to power, remaining in power, he has been courting the most extreme elements from both the religious and nationalist fringe right, and trying to draw them into his coalition to try to ensure that he gets that right-wing majority that he needs in order to win and carry this vote in this election.
April 9th is the date for those elections. Douglas Herbert, I want to thank John Lyndon for stopping in and joining us.